Warning, this episode contains strong language.
The problem is basically that was a pretty local story in Missouri until the football team decided to publicly announce their intention to strike unless my boss stepped down.
Yeah.
And he did so within a couple of days of that. So that's what really happened. My departure from the chancellorship was not connected to the racial discussions on campus at the time directly at all. That's something you would know if you were locally there.
Sure.
See that in the national media and the things you probably saw when you Googled my name out there. But what really, I'll say this, Ferguson was a catalyst, and it wasn't just Ferguson itself. What was more telling was the day in which the grand jury decision not to indict the police officer that shot Michael Brown. When that was announced, that really was the beginning, if you will, of much conversation and much anxiety on the campus in Columbia, Missouri.
Welcome to the Lone Star Play Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Scott Armstrong. Join me and a famous guest every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We discuss their career, life, food, Texas, and everything in between. Let's get started. All right, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Lone Star Play Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Scott Armstrong. Okay, welcome to, another great episode, right? My guest today is R. Bowen Loftin. He is the former chancellor at the University of Missouri, and he was the 24th president at Texas A&M University. So we got a great chance to talk to him. He was born and raised here in Texas, so we talked to him about that, growing up in Texas, his stint at Texas A&M, where he still resides and still works with the university in some capacity. So we talked to him about that. We also talked to him about his experience at the University of Missouri and, being the chancellor there. Obviously, you heard in the clip, he was there during a pretty crazy time after everything that happened in Ferguson, and it carried over to the school. And he had to resign, and he kind of went over that whole situation that was, all in the national media. We also spoke a little bit about what happened at Texas A&M as well. This was a great episode. He was really open and honest and just a great guy. Just had a really good conversation about all of this stuff. So, please, you're going to enjoy it. All right. So again, don't forget, before we get to the episode, let's talk about social media. Okay. So make sure to follow us online. And as always, check out our website, lonestarplate.com. All right. And don't forget, leave us a review, please. We like that stuff. That would be great. All right. So, okay. What's next? Yeah, the episode, right? That's it. What else are we going to do here? So let's just get to it. R. Bowen Loftin. Great episode. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about growing up in Texas and what that was like and some of the things that have happened in your life. So, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, look, let's start there. Let's start with where exactly you grew up in Texas.
I grew up about 25 miles south of where I'm sitting right now, a small town named Navasota. I was born actually just north of here in a town called Hearn, but that was a one-day residence. And at age one day, I moved to my growing up place in Navasota.
Nice. And so how exactly did you end up at A&M? What made you not want to go out of state? Did you love it so much you were like, I got to stay in Texas?
Well, many factors. We had no money when I was growing up, so travel was very rare. I traveled basically to see relatives within the state. My couple excursions out of the state in growing up one was a brief trip to New Mexico to a place called Carlsbad Caverns, and another few times I went across the border down in Eagle Pass or Del Rio. So those were my travel experiences growing up. So I had no real experience living outside of Texas at all. So staying in the state was important. When I was in high school, I applied to only 3 universities. One was Texas A&M, one was University of Texas at Austin, and the third was Rice University. All 3 wrote back to me, no email in those days, wrote back and said, you're admitted. They continued and said, you were going to be given a tuition scholarship. And I was ecstatic because, again, I was in a family with just no money, basically.
Yeah.
I had worked for a small hourly wage. My mom didn't work until I was probably midway through high school. She worked also for an hourly wage. So we really had very little money to spare. And so even though it wasn't as expensive then as it is now to go to college, it was still a consideration. I was ecstatic until I began looking at the literature they sent me and realized that tuition wasn't the only cost. That gave me pause. And I told my father, I said, Dad, I better just go ahead and get a job after high school and earn some money and save it, live at home, do what I can to reduce expenses. And then I can afford maybe to go to college in the following year. And he wasn't happy about that. But in those days, we didn't have the guaranteed student loans that are available today. There was just no way to make it happen. But magical took place. In March of 1967, I got a second letter from Texas A&M saying that one of its graduates, a former student, had recently passed away and left money, an endowment to fund a scholarship for someone just like me.
Oh, wow.
A tuition-only scholarship and having basically a full-ride scholarship. But
wow.
That made my choice of schools extremely.
Yeah. You're like, which one do I go to? Oh, the one giving me money. Let me go to this one. Yeah.
We all understand that today, I think.
Yeah. I would 100%, completely.
I know, remember, I grew up close to here. I grew up a few miles away from here. And so I knew this place pretty well. I'd been on campus a number of times and through my schooling and in public schools in Navasota, because events were here occasionally. I've been to a few sporting events here when I could find the dollars to do that. So this place wasn't strange to me. I had a great visit at Rice in Houston. But again, expensive, even with a tuition scholarship, expensive place to be. Went to Austin to visit the University of Texas Austin there. I'll never forget walking into the admissions receiving place there, which they directed me to when I asked about a campus tour. And I walked in there and said, I'm here for a campus tour. And the person behind the counter never even looked up. They handed me a little folded map and said, here's a map of the campus, good luck. And that was the introduction I had to that university. I did spend the day walking around the campus there. It wasn't a very big campus compared to Texas A&M's, but no one ever spoke to me. No one really offered to help me, which was not what I'd seen at places like Texas A&M or at Rice. And so it was a somewhat different welcoming, shall we say, than I had here.
Yeah, I get it completely. That's probably the best way to figure out, what school you want to just take a walk through, see what sort of reactions you get, right? Like how people.
Well, walking through it's important, but the most important thing of all is having someone take you on a walk.
Sure.
Who's going to school there. Someone about your own age who's gone through the same processes you've gone through and thinking about where to go to school, why to go to school at a certain location, and get frank answers to your question. Get a sense of who they are, why they're there, and what really drew them to this campus compared to some other place they might have gone to. That's what I saw here at Texas A&M when I was working on campus. Was every day I would see people do that, both in organized ways and unorganized ways. Common A&M is if you're walking around with a map in your hands or looking a little lost, someone's going to stop very quickly and say, can I help you? And they won't give you directions. They'll actually take you where you want to go, even out of their way. That's not a common occurrence if you go across many campuses as I have in my career and see sort of the cultural differences between those campuses.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I remember going to back in like 2000, 99, 2000, 2001. I grew up in the Dallas area. I still lived there at that time. I would drive down to College Station to visit my friends. We had just recently graduated high school, so everyone's going to a lot of them went to A&M. A great campus. You're right. I always had good times there. Always, it was always a friendly place to go and very different. It was just very. I guess we consider it, agricultural, so it was more rustic, more cowboy, more. That's how I looked at it going down there to that school, as opposed to, I don't know, UT or North Texas or something even there in Dallas. But it's still all Texas at the end of the day. But I'm curious. You mentioned both of the schools, A&M and Texas. What other differences do you feel like are between those schools, and because there's such a rivalry, obviously, between the schools?
Well, there certainly has been in the last several years, and I've been blamed for that. But just a couple of things I'll observe, and I'm not trying to disparage anybody here. Yeah. But I think you find a different feel for the campuses. You mentioned agriculture. That's a big thing at A&M, but not the biggest thing by any means. Engineering is by far the largest college within Texas A&M University's boundaries. They're moving towards 25,000 students by 2025 is the goal the dean has set for them. Ag is a big school here, but by no means the largest college that we have. Historically, this is a land grant institution. The Morrill Act that was signed by Lincoln in 1863 created a mechanism to allow these kinds of schools to exist. Prior to then, almost all the universities in the country, in the world for that matter, were private. They just catered to those who could afford to go there. And that meant only a certain type of person could really attend the university back in the 19th century. The Morrill Act changed all that. And it created these schools that were supposed to train people, educate them in useful arts. And that meant agriculture, engineering. Also, there was a piece of it which said military training and service was part of that as well. Not just Texas A&M, which has a famous and well-known Corps of Cadets, but every land grant school at one point in history had these young men in uniforms marching around the campus, getting trained in military arts while they were going to school. That was part of the Morrill Act. That sort of died away in the 20th century. When I was at Mizzou, there were pictures I was given there which showed ranks of young men dressed in uniform on the main quadrangle of the campus in the 1800s, which is a common thing. Texas A&M is one of the schools that sort of kept that alive, perhaps more so than most schools of its nature have. But every state has one or more land grant schools. They have become the backbone in many respects of public education in the United States, and an example for many. But UT didn't start that way, basically. They started a different kind of way, and they focused a lot on liberal arts. That was a major part of their focus going forward. You had different kinds of choices here. And based on who you were you coming from an urban place like Dallas, or were you coming from a place like I came from, where farming and ranching were the norms? So your choice was based on comfort, based on what your parents did for a living, based on your own aspirations, which were shaped by where you grew up oftentimes. So it's not surprising that the UT system primarily has its campuses in urban settings.
Yeah.
The A&M system has its campuses primarily, not all, but primarily in rural or small town settings. I mean, College Station, when this place was started, was a single building, a railroad station. That's all there was here. And it was 5 miles to the nearest town, which was Bryan, Texas.
What year was that? What year was that?
1876 is the beginning of this university. The first class came here in October of 1876. And so basically that sort of, you got off the train, what'd you see? Prairie. That's all you saw. If it was raining, you got muddy. The first dorms were tents. Those were the sort of things we live with here. I mean, there were frequent fires because at that time heating and light was provided by fire, not by lamps. And so buildings burned down. We had several major fires here on campus early in its life, and students oftentimes were forced to live in tents because no place else existed. And it was a 5-mile trek or a short train ride to get to the nearest civilization, which was Bryan, Texas, 5 miles north of the campus.
Yeah.
It's stark, but that wasn't unusual. Go to Blacksburg, Virginia, and look at Virginia Tech. It's in the middle of nowhere, essentially.
Yeah.
And you have the same kind of feeling in terms of the nature of the location there as you would see here at Texas A&M. So again, different things here. Just very different sorts of cultural settings here. One example, this is a very churched town. Most people here belong to a church of some type, and same for the students. You don't find that quite the same way in Austin, Texas. Again, I'm not disparaging anybody here. I'm just saying it's just different.
Yeah.
There's a Bible study every Tuesday night here at Texas A&M in the basketball arena, and up to 10,000 students attend that. You don't see that many places.
Wow.
So you can understand why
That's incredible.
a certain kind of background would prefer their child come here and not someplace else. It's not surprising. And so I'm not, again, trying to make it look like it's better or worse. It's just different. And I think difference is an attractor for many people. The campus is keeping its growth pattern intact. When I was here as president, we crossed 50,000 students. Now there are around 70,000 students. They aren't all right here. There are a few pieces of A&M elsewhere, but it gives you a sense of scale. It's a big university, biggest certainly in Texas in terms of student population. It's got a lot of land. The main campus is over 5,000 acres. There's a satellite campus called the Rellis campus, not too far from here in Bryan, which is over 6,000 acres. So lots of land, lots of space. When I was here as a student, we lived on what's called the East Campus, east of the railroad track that bisects the campus. Now you have huge amounts of stuff on the west side of those tracks. In my day, the only thing over here was pig farms and the vet school, and that's changed a bit since those days. I was a student here at Texas A&M.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, you've seen the changes more than anybody. That's incredible. Yeah, gosh, that's, it's crazy how much, schools change and they start to grow. And, I'm curious if, where are you at exactly right now? You're down there at the school?
Yes, I retired last year when I was in Missouri. We always plan to come back here. This is home turf, if you will, a place with many friends and many great memories. So we purchased a house here back in January of 2018, not knowing when I would retire exactly. I chose to retire September 1 of last year, and we're back here in October, moved back here permanently. So this always was our target to be a retirement place, and it's reality now for us. So I'm sitting literally in Bryan, Texas, on the very northern edge of it, basically. If I climb a tree outside my house, I can see Kyle Field, the football stadium, easily from here.
If you climb a tree, I love that. That's hilarious. Well, I'm in Austin, so not far at all. That's great. I didn't know where you are. People, they might be, somewhere normally, but because of the pandemic, I'll talk to them and they're, staying with family here or there or wherever. So that's great that you're able to, stay here in Texas. How's it been for you? Have you been in Texas the whole time during the pandemic? Has this been?
Yes, we were here certainly. I mean, the biggest difference is simply mobility is challenging now, getting where you want to go. We had planned on having a great time at Aggie Sports. We enjoyed about a dozen games, baseball and softball, before things changed. We were just starting conference play, and it ended. And
Totally.
So, it's been a little more boring, perhaps, than you might want it to be, with less things to do. For a while, restaurants were closed. That's not quite true now. We have restaurants open with reduced capacity, certainly in the area. So we eat out maybe once a week, something like that. We we stay together, my wife and I, of course, all the time, but she rides a horse almost every day. So she goes off to her barn and rides a horse for a while. That's her of enjoyment and training. I stay here at the house or go to meetings by Zoom or sometimes physically. I'm trying to write a few things, and that keeps me busy. I'm involved with Zoom calls usually a few times a day like this one, so this is common as well. So I mostly work out of my office where I am right now. It's a comfortable place to be. We're very happy here right now, just missing the attributes of a completely open environment that we intended to come back to here.
Sure.
I no doubt in my mind that we're going to get past all this ultimately. And we'll have life not totally back to where it once was, at least somewhat more normal than it's been for a while.
Where are things at the school right now with everything, classes and?
They reopened. They opened up the campus about a week earlier than normally would be the case. Enrollment here is up, I think, over last year. So that's
Wow.
datum.
Okay, that's interesting.
Students are taking a lot of online courses. I taught a class yesterday, for example, as just a guest lecturer. One time this class on campus, I had perhaps 3/4 of the class was in front of me, and 1/4 was on Zoom, interacting that way. Other classes are almost totally online as far as the lecture part of the course is concerned. Laboratories are largely in person, but some of those actually are virtual as well. But most of those are in person. So every student you talk to here will probably be doing a sort of a hybrid circumstance. They'll be in class a lot by Zoom. They'll also be going to certain classes or going to certain laboratories during the course of the week for in-person type experiences. The case is well over 1,000, which is surprising given the size of the campus.
Do you think that's the future? Like, do you think that it'll kind of be a hybrid moving forward, sort of thing?
It's hard to go back again. I mean, for example, so rolling out of bed and getting dressed and going to class at 9 o'clock in the morning, a student can kind of roll over, grab their laptop, and go to class right there. That's a hard thing to compete with. I mean, you're a pretty young guy. You appreciate how it is. I mean, students really, their lives are somewhat offset from mine. Their peak is probably late afternoon. If they get their druthers, they'd rather just get up afternoon for classes and such and spend their evenings studying, working, or socializing. That's just very common. A&M has not had a history of online education in the large. They've had pieces of it. The Bush School, for example, a government public service, has had a fairly robust graduate program that's online, but they're strictly graduate. The undergraduates here have traditionally, until very recently, been in a physical seat, in a physical classroom with a physical person in front of them, walking them through whatever material they're studying that day. That's been the norm here. And online education has been a pretty small thing. At Mizzou, where I was for a time, very different model there. They have a lot more online courses available, and the average student took at least one online course per semester, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They wanted the flexibility of scheduling. They wanted a part-time job. They wanted to go to organizational meetings, things like that. They had things they wanted to do, and classes every day of the week got in the way of that, and they would manage their schedule by taking at least one online course per semester. That wasn't the culture here at Texas A&M, but I'm guessing as we go back to normal, whatever that is, we will have this memory going with us saying, hey, I like the idea of being able to stay in bed in Thursday mornings, not go to my class at 9 o'clock and do my class right there online. I suspect that's going to become a difficult thing to get away from once we've now experienced it during this time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This hybrid learning sort of thing that'll stay around because of its flexibility. It's interesting to see how education is going to move forward with technology, because I'm assuming this is only the beginning, right? The Zooms,
It has to. I mean, again, we've been doing it a long time. I've done it for a long time, but the majority of faculty don't do it, haven't done it until they've been forced into it. Without a lot of preparation sometimes, and it probably shows in the quality of what's there, but they'll get better at it. They'll figure it out. And so I don't see this going away. I think it'll change from the moment we're at right now, but I suspect much more balance will exist at every school, including Texas A&M, between online and in-person learning. That's just going to be a fact of how we do education going forward. And it's freeing in many respects. I mean, again, you have the time then to manage differently. You can have a part-time job during the day if you want to, because you've got the online class you can get to when you're not working. You can have 3 clubs or 3 organizations and do things.
Exactly.
The athletes have been doing it for quite a while. Student athletes who travel to games, things like that, are familiar with online education because they have no choice sometimes but to do it. And, they're certainly able to compete right now because they're isolating themselves in many cases from their normal friends and haunts. And by doing so, are being, forced to use the online resources they've had before. This isn't different for them in many respects. I'm sure they miss their friends and things like that, but hopefully that part will come back again, because I think, going to a college university is not just going to class. It's learning about life. It's meeting perhaps a life partner. A lot of lessons learned when you're at a place like this between 18 and 22 years of age that you don't necessarily get at home or in the workplace by itself. And so I think coming to a place will not go away. Universities like this will continue to have a place to be, but it'll be a little bit different in the future than it's been in the past for many of us like Texas A&M.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you mentioned a lot of positive things, which is kind of good. So, some of these resources, just by doing online learning and video conferencing, and those are tools to use in the business world, because the business world uses that stuff all day long. So if you sort of avoid that, it kind of wouldn't make sense. They're absolutely going to be prepared moving in. Right. It's just another aspect of it.
WFH will stay around. I mean, work from home will not go away. I mean, so many companies are realizing that their employees are as productive, maybe more productive
or more
at home than they were at the office. Miss some things. Dynamics may be missing there, some of the interaction you're used to having there, and not everybody can do it as well as others can do it. So I think there'll be a mix of that. But I believe companies will have a hard time putting this genie back in the bottle again once it's gotten out. The downside is if you've got, 2 7-year-olds running around the house here, these twins are going to be distracting. It'll be a problem for you. Son who lives near Denver and works for a big company there is working from home mostly with a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. And that's a challenging moment there for him to keep his focus on his job and his meetings and such that are Zoom based or based on some of the technology. And if the kids are running around wanting some attention right now, that's a hard thing. Many parents aren't equipped to be homeschoolers. They just really aren't. My daughter has done that. She lives in Alaska. She's homeschooled almost all of her kids for most of their schooling time. And she has 5 of them. She's a trained educator. She has degrees in education. She's used to teaching. And she's a homeschooler right now, which is now a much more common thing than we had before. And again, some people are able to do that well, some aren't so much, and figure that out over time. And I suspect we'll see homeschooling, which has always been around, now grow in a permanent way to a larger percentage of our population.
That might be a good thing, in fact, in a lot of ways. It's going to probably put some relief on schools, which now funding can be used in different ways. I wonder if there'll be some sort of tax credit if you homeschool, so you get.
We'll see. It's rare to see it go the other way. We'll have to see how that works out.
I mean, if you're paying taxes for the public school and you're like, wait, I'm going to put my kids at home, maybe you get a little cut, a little check, a little something. I don't have kids. I'm always like, I pay for schools. I don't even have kids. I don't even use these schools, but I pay the taxes because I know these kids are right there. They're going to go out into the world. They're going to be, I'm all about education, even if it's not my own. I personally missed out on the university experience. Hearing you talk about that experience, whatever, it kind of, not that it hasn't hit me before, but it's kind of like, I kind of missed out on that a little bit. I did other things. I've traveled. I've lived in other countries. I mean, I've done other things, have my own experiences, but in a lot of ways, sometimes I do kind of regret not taking that experience back then in my life. I couldn't, as we say in Spanish, quieto. I couldn't stay quieto. I couldn't stay still. So I knew if I went to school, I knew the money would go to waste. I knew I would probably drop out, and maybe I was wrong thinking, that way. It's interesting.
I don't think you were. I mean, we're all different. Okay, we're all different.
Sure.
That period of your life from 18 to 22 is a pretty interesting part of your life there. I mean, you want independence. You want to be out of the house probably and on your own to some extent. But you also have a very strong desire for socialization in most cases. You want to be with people sort of your age. you're part of the world. And that's an important part of growth right there, is learning to relate to people, to be able to see differences in people. If you come from a small town in this country, you might not see people much different than you till you get to college. That's a very, very real possibility. And so it's a place where you begin to appreciate that we're all different, and there's things that you can learn from each other that maybe you couldn't get in a very homogeneous population where you grew up. Those like you who are urbanites who grew up in a big city, that's somewhat different. But my point is, everyone is different. Everyone has their own unique styles and needs, and given the ability to figure it out is an important thing. You want to be able to explore yourself and learn how you fit into the world. You did it your way, I did it my way. That's okay. No.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't have everything, right? You look back, you're like, I can't do everything, because at that time I had a lot of great experiences in that point of my life. It's not like I wasn't doing anything. I was doing stuff. So, I never felt any pressure from my parents or anything. They were always just, do what you want as long as you're not hurting anybody in the world and you're making a living and you're working and, you're doing something, you're giving back in some way. So yeah, there was no issue there. I did go to a trade school for broadcasting to learn how to broadcast for a year, which I did get that experience, of being with people and hanging out and that sort of, but definitely not a campus sort of. But I would still go to these campuses, which I think a lot of people my age did back then, which is all my friends still go to school, right? So I would go to UNT or you go to SMU or,
makes sense.
So you're still hanging out and getting some of the stuff, but it's more the extracurricular stuff, hearing people talk about their classes also made me like, damn, I definitely don't want to go to school. Like, I love learning, but I don't know. I just, it's just a different type of person. But yeah, that's interesting how it is. You mentioned about, maintaining or going to school is being part of, seeing other things, seeing other cultures, meeting other people, right? Just getting a different experience. All of a sudden, your vision is widened in a way, if we want to say a perspective. And I find that fascinating because I do feel that that's a big, important part of life. And I'm curious if you think, and I mentioned A&M specifically because you have so much experience there. How do you feel A&M has handled sort of, I don't know, racial tensions and things like, is it gotten better? Are things bad there? Because there's this whole argument, right, of racism and systemic racism. I know you have a little bit of background in that. I'm not trying to get too much into that.
It's okay. It's okay.
I'm curious.
I don't know all the elements of what's going on right now. During my time as president here, we had some issues arise. That's
Sure.
just of a large campus like this. Be aware that Texas A&M's population of students is about 4% African American. UT Austin's is about double that. So there's a difference right there immediately. The Latino population here is much larger. My last year as president, 25% of our entering class of freshmen were Latinos. That's different than it used to be, but it is a fact. And so if you walk this campus, being Black, you're going to be seeing not that many like you. If you walk this campus and your last name is Garcia or Hernandez, you'll see many people like you with the same last names. That's just the way it's going to be. So it's a different situation depending on where you're coming from. During my time, we didn't have any major racial protests. Here, they focused initially on a statue on the campus. Lawrence Sullivan Ross. Ross was president of the university a long time ago. That's why that statue is here. He was also a Confederate officer. And so that's why the protests have occurred. So again, you have the situation. I encountered the same kind of problem when I was at Missouri as chancellor. There's a statue of Thomas Jefferson in the middle of that campus. And I had students come to me and say, this statue offends me because he owned slaves. Slaves, whatever they might have said about it. And I dealt with that. The statue is still there, but we had a lot of dialogue about it during my time as chancellor. It's come back again this past year. There's been a lot of protests about that statue being there again. So you're going to find those kind of things on this campus. Besides that statue, there are other things. There's buildings named for people that lived at the time of the Civil War. There are street names. There are things like that. There are many elements of the campus that have been here for a very long time. But if you dig deep enough, you will find possibly some reasons to object to it. And that's what some people have been able to do. So far as I can tell, nothing's really changed yet. There is a pretty large, about 40-person committee that the current president has appointed to look at these issues. They're going to report back probably in another month or two. We'll see what they say about things then. But right now, nothing's really changed very much. The legislature may get involved. The Attorney General of Texas issued a ruling recently that the statue was placed there by the legislature, not by the university, and therefore the legislature controls whether it stays or goes.
Oh, wow.
AG says right now.
Yeah.
That holds up legally, then it would not be a decision of the university president or the university board of regents. It'd be a decision made in Austin by our legislature. So I can't predict that, but right now, things are what they are. I would say at the moment, what's crystallizing things here is football. We're looking at the first game being played here in the fall season a week from Saturday. And football is a pretty big deal at Texas A&M, at many schools like us.
Yeah, in Texas.
People's thoughts are going that direction right now.
Sure.
And some of the things that were in place in the late summer and early fall as school began to start up.
Yeah, there's a game at UT as well, but I also see there's some. I honestly, I'll be frank. I really have no opinion one way or the other. But I see everyone's perspective. But there's some controversy about having these games, and people are a little outraged at why have the games? We've all been staying at home. How are we going to get all these groups together? How do you feel about that? Do you think we should get back to the games? What are the sort of the pros and cons of that?
Well, there's certainly risks. I think that the way the teams are managed can be very positive. Some schools have had a fair number of cases, some have not. LSU's coach recently announced that most of his players either had the COVID-19 virus or had it. That's a pretty big deal. But again, I think you can manage it within the framework of a team if you take precautions, and if, in particular, the team members are actually responsible people who won't go out and socialize in ways that exacerbates the potential or the probability.
The stands that people worry about.
The problem is going to be the fans. I mean, the
fans, exactly.
The stadium will be at 25%. They're going to require mask wearing during entrance, egress, as well as during the game itself. We will see what happens after that. Clearly in the local area where I live right now, cases were trending down quite a bit till the students got back, and they've spiked up again. They're trending down again right now, so I think there's been some mitigation done to try to reduce the risks here. But the reported cases each day are largely college-age students. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about people from 18 and 24 years of age being the predominant folks who are getting infected right now in the local area I live in. And that's just almost due to the university reopening itself.
Sure.
But again, the way it works, I think, will be interesting. They prohibited tailgating, which is pretty big deal for this place. It's a big tailgating school.
So is UT here.
Tailgates will be handled this particular time. They may change that later on. The big news, of course, is the Big Ten has announced they're going to resume their season in October. That was surprising to me in a way. I know a lot of those presidents and chancellors in the Big Ten. And in the Pac, I wasn't surprised those schools made those choices not to have a season this year. But now the Big Ten is bowing to the obvious pressure from many of the alumni of those schools in that conference to resume that season now. And we'll see what happens with that. I do think that we've learned a lot from the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball about how to manage this well. The real problem is going to be the stands. In the NBA and MLB, you have nobody in the stands, but cardboard. And so that won't be the case here at Texas A&M or at UT Austin. And so we'll have to see exactly what that means over time. I'm guessing a couple weeks after the first game, we'll know more than we know right now about that. And so we could see things change. I just don't know what the answer will be. I think it is manageable if you really want to take a fairly strict view of how to do things. especially among the teams. And that makes it, at least palatable to be able to do this. But even there, some students are opting not to play because they worry about the disease. They're relatively at low risk of any permanent problems with it, but some have died, some have gotten very sick. That's very demonstrable. So we'll have to see what goes on here. I'm not luckily in a place where I'll make those decisions anymore.
Sure, I understand. I understand. Yeah, but I'm curious your opinion because, like I said, I see everybody's perspective, and I try to stay out of things I just don't know much about. Yeah, I'm not an expert about, and I see everyone's perspective about wanting to get things back up and running as well. Gosh, it pains me. So I see that as well, but also see that we have to be cautious. I think it's a balance, right? A hybrid, like we were talking earlier. I just think it's a good balance. Right. That we'll see what happens and how that moves forward. One thing I do want to talk about, you were bringing up, I actually didn't know too much about you before this interview, to be honest with you. So I did a lot of research on you. I really deep. I do that for every guest. That's part. That's my job. I enjoy it. That's my favorite part of the job is learning about people and then getting excited about wanting to talk to them. So I'm looking at some of this stuff that happened up in Missouri. My father's from Missouri, from St. Louis. So I got a lot of family there, a lot of connections there. But I don't really know too much about it. Don't really go there, don't really know too much about it. But I just thought, okay, this sort of hits close to home. And I remember the news when a lot of this was happening. But, what I'm curious about, and my question is this, it's a little long-winded question, but so everything that happened in Ferguson, they say, right? So this led to some protests there at the school because, these are people that grew up in that area as well. And now they're students here. And I'm curious if, so they're saying there's this systemic racism on campus. And again, I don't have this university experience, so I don't really know, but I did see some isolated incidents. So, okay, that actually happened, but was there actually something really there and do you really feel that, everything that happened with Ferguson, had that not maybe happened, would have brought that attention to the school and, your decision to step down, which I felt a little sad about that. I just thought, God, that stinks, like that you have to step down and, I just feel like you got caught up in something, this whirlwind of stuff and, just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I was basically collateral damage, if you want to call it that. The problem is basically that was a pretty local story in Missouri until the football team decided to publicly announce their intention to strike unless my boss stepped down.
Yeah.
And he did so within a couple of days of that. So that's what really happened. My departure from the chancellorship was not connected to the racial discussions on campus at the time directly at all. That's something you would know if you were locally there.
Sure.
See that in the national media and the things you probably saw when you Googled my name out there. But what really, I'll say this, Ferguson was a catalyst, and it wasn't just Ferguson itself. What was more telling was the day in which the grand jury decision not to indict the police officer that shot Michael Brown, when that was announced, that really was the beginning, if you will, of much conversation and much anxiety on the campus in Columbia, Missouri, which is about a couple hours drive from St. Louis and Ferguson where it happened. So I would say Ferguson was a catalyst. There were some students, not many, but some students at the campus from Ferguson, many more new people from Ferguson. And there were some, and Ferguson happened during the summer. So we had a much lower population of students there. The grand jury announcement happened the Monday of Thanksgiving week when students were already gone. It was a total week off for them. And so they weren't there. So what we arranged was a series of conversations with our students the week following the announcement in November of 2014 of the grand jury results. And that's really what started a whole series of conversations and meetings all through the rest of that year and the first half of 2015. The real sort of national news came about because A man named Jonathan Butler, who organized a small group of students called Concerned Student 1950. And they presented me and others with a list of demands, requirements that they wanted us to meet. And we met often, we talked a lot, we worked through those things they had listed and talked about what could be done, what couldn't be done. And the only thing that I differed with them on basically was the time frame. For example, one demand was that we have 10% of the faculty being African American. Well, in some departments it was more than that, in many it was much less than that. In some it was zero. The problem is to get a PhD in an area where you can be qualified to be a faculty member at a university like that takes a while. If you ask the question, how many African Americans have a PhD in a given year in physics or chemistry, the answer is not very many. And by the way, many universities want them. And so the ability to grow your faculty quickly just wasn't there in a lot of areas. And they understood that, but of course, students want things to change during their lifetime, their 4 years campus, and that was what the problem was. The other issue we really couldn't address immediately was curriculum. They wanted courses in place that would help educate all students about their backgrounds and their histories and their concerns. And I had no real issue with that, but the faculty owned the curriculum, not the chancellor. So I couldn't do that. But what happened is they turned their attention from me to my boss, the system head, and ultimately he was the focus for their attention. And ultimately he was forced to resign. And I left for really other reasons, if you want to dig into it more deeply than that. But nonetheless, it was timing that made that appear to be the case, and that's what it is. No regrets about that. I did what I could do.
Yeah.
In the circumstances. At some point, I wasn't allowed to anymore, and that's where things went south. Really, is when a person above me who was less experienced in university settings than I was just didn't really know how to handle that sort of situation. But again, the catalyst was Ferguson in a way back in 2014. A year later, roughly, we had this problem at Mizzou with the football team, which got national attention, and otherwise it had been a local story that you probably wouldn't have heard about much.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, it's absolutely believable that the lens would be blurred from local to national, right? The news that you get, there's always more to the story than what you get nationally, which doesn't surprise me at all. It sounds like definitely just collateral damage, which stinks. I'm glad some changes were made, hopefully positive changes, but
Well, there were some changes made, and again, if you go there today, you'd find that the students I dealt with are all gone.
Yeah.
Who are there today who are concerned about the current circumstance, have some of the same issues that we had back in 2014 and 2015. We'll see what happens. I don't know that much will change necessarily very quickly. We made some changes where we could make changes rapidly back in my time. I think there's been some progress being made, but I'd be very surprised if things were all totally perfect today compared to what they were back when I was there. I'd be very surprised about that. It's not something easy. As I told people many times, you can do many things, but you can't change hearts. And that's what it comes down to, is changing hearts. I think that, given long periods of time, this can happen. But you don't really mandate that your heart be changed. And that's what difficulties exist when you're trying to make changes rapidly in a place like Missouri or Texas A&M or anywhere else in the world for that matter.
Sure. No, absolutely. I'm sure you've thought about this, several times and probably had conversations, but in retrospect, looking back on that situation, would you do something differently? Would you have done something differently?
Not I. I mean, really, I did what I thought was right. If you talk to the students who were there at the time, I think they would agree that I was open to conversations with them, open to addressing things that could be dealt with level, and I try to get others engaged with that process as well as appropriate. What really took place was the person who was my immediate superior deciding that he wanted to be in charge. He could do better than me, and he said, basically step aside, and I did. And so that's where we were. And there's plenty of things out there. There's an interesting YouTube you can find with over 1 million views of him being confronted by the students outside of a venue in Kansas City after he'd gone to a fundraiser there. And he was asked by these students to define systemic racism. And he didn't do too well with that. You can judge for yourself. So my point is, he wasn't a bad person exactly. He just didn't know what he was doing. He was an IBM sales executive during much of his career. He had no graduate education at all. And so he was put in a place where he was managing a 4-campus system. And that wasn't a good place for him to be, probably.
Yeah, that sounds, sometimes you're just in, like you said, over your head. You just don't, not a bad person, just doesn't have experience with that. Who do you think, how do you find that right person as a university? It's got to be
very difficult these days. If you look at the press, you'll find that virtually every university president is criticized pretty often. Michigan's president is in deep doo-doo right now, for example. It's in the news yesterday and today. It's a very difficult place to be. Understand this, that the expectations are so different now than they once were.
Sure.
The ubiquity of smartphones that capture audio and video are just huge. And so consequently, every single thing you say, do, is captured potentially by someone else. And that can either be put out like it is, or it can be manipulated a bit to show only parts of what happened, and that's okay. I don't object to that, but it gives you a different kind of world to interact with and deal with than people had even just a decade ago. So things have changed radically over that time. If you look at my background, you'll find that I'm one of the few university leaders who actually embrace social media. And that was, a mixed blessing. I have hacked a few times, things like that. It got me in some hot water, but that's what it's about. I use that, though, very deliberately as a way to keep track of what was going on in the minds of my students. I could spend a couple hours a day on the timeline and see what was happening on the campus in ways that nobody else in the administration did. I probably dialogued with at least 100 students a day individually through DMs and other means in social media to answer questions, provide them with some feedback on issues they had. But I also listened a lot that way. I spent a couple hours a day, every day, just looking at what students were saying about their campus, their university. And that was very telling, very interesting. You don't get that kind of honest, unfiltered sort of feedback any other way. If they come to the office, are going to be filtering somewhat what they say to you. Even those who are there to protest are going to be filtering what they say to you. But when they put it on social media, it's usually pretty raw. And when you look at that, you can really learn a lot about what's in the minds of these students pretty efficiently. I did that here at Texas A&M. I did that at Missouri. And that's really how I interacted with the students a lot. It's very difficult for a university leader at a place as big as A&M or Missouri to be able to really get to know students well. It's a big place, so much to do. My days were 14, 15 hours long, and that was 7 days a week. There was just no break for years and years and years. And that kind of schedule, you have a hard time really being reflective and learning much. And so I used a couple hours a day just to learn privately about what's going on the campus there and use that to make decisions with, to actually affect change in many cases. And that's something that's pretty rare even today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be absolutely like a minefield, like walking through a minefield trying to, work social media at that time. I'm curious why no one else, right, was at that time, or when you started doing that, was thinking, oh yeah, this is absolutely to get the finger on the pulse of what the students are actually thinking and what's happening, right? I wasn't
the only person. There were a handful of us. The University of Cincinnati president at the time was quite, quite a presence on social media. Others were. There were a handful of us. There was a young man up in Canada who did a master's thesis on this very topic and then turned it into a book. So there's a book out there, which is now a little dated, but it really documents probably 20 of us around the country, candidates that were pretty active social media users during their presidencies, and he was trying to use that book as a way of educating others who might want to do this about the pros and cons of it and some of the techniques you might want to employ. So there's some stuff out there. People, I'm not the only person, but again, nobody at a place as big as A&M or Missouri, to my knowledge, has done that much of it. I'd say the only real comparable person would be Santos who was then at Cincinnati. He's elsewhere now, but he was there at a particular time. And others were at smaller schools typically. But again, it's a two-edged sword. You can hurt yourself by using it inappropriately. You can also help yourself and help your university by using it appropriately. And it's hard to learn that without getting burned a little bit occasionally.
Oh, I can't imagine the pressures there for sure. Are you still, do you ever do anything with the Missouri anymore, or are you still?
Very little. I retired officially from there back at the end of last summer of 2019. Moved back here. I have some good friends there. I was on line one today. I do talk to people. I keep in touch with people there. I kind of follow what's going on there, but I don't have any real official involvement. I really retired from. We always want to be back here. A&M it's more of a home to me than Missouri was, given my roots here and in fact, Texas is where I'm from, many generations along one line anyway. And so this is the place we wanted to be. A lot of friends here have been friends for a very long time. And we're just blessed to be among those who have, I think, a love for the institution I have and really enjoy being here and also enjoy this company from time to time as well. Hopefully more as we get through the COVID problem than we've been able to the last several months anyway.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Well, listen, I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation, and I really just appreciate your candidness and openness. I love just having, these conversations about stuff. I love just talking to people about, anything really. But this was absolutely fascinating, to be honest with you. I know our listeners are going to be thrilled with this episode. I've learned a lot.
I hope so.
Yeah, I learned a lot for sure. And when I learn something, I know our listeners learn. I'm
just disappointed when you get around talking about food. But that's
it happens. It happens sometime. We can talk quickly about food. We'll dedicate a couple minutes here. Quickly tell us what kind of food are you? Are you a vegan or a vegetarian? These are hot things right now. Are you on the keto diet? What are you?
I'm the son of a cattle rancher. Okay, so that should tell you something right there. I grew up with beef largely, a bit of pork and poultry too, but mostly with beef. For years and years, I had no time to cook. My mother was a great Southern cook. She trained me a bit when I was at home in high school and be prepared to go out on my own someday. And I did that for a while. And then after I got married, we had kids. It was more complicated. And then I got jobs, just took me away a lot and kept me busy a lot. So it was much less. Once I retired back in 2015, I was able to kind of return to the kitchen again and get back into the cooking mode. I've also joined a cult. It's called the Big Green Egg Cult. So I have a big green egg out back here that I do a lot of smoking and grilling on. I enjoy that a lot, learning to use that. It's kind of an interesting experience, and you learn a lot, and you also make some mistakes occasionally. But I'm the cook here. My wife's never liked to cook very much, and so she can do it. So I'm the chef, and having people over tonight, for example. So I'm doing some teriyaki chicken tonight for us to share together. But I have about probably 40 or 50 dishes that I do routinely, and maybe once every week or two, I'll bring something new into the repertoire then. And again, the last several months since I bought a big green egg, I've been really learning to use it. There is really a cult out there. There's a lot of social media groups about the egg, and I have several friends here and classmates in town near me who have one. And so we have a lot of shared information flowing back and forth about what worked and didn't work. So it's a little culture and a cult there you can enjoy yourself. But I have found that cooking is like mowing a lawn. You do something which is useful. You actually can see, and in fact, this says eat, the results of your labor. Many jobs I have had, it was hard to see the results. I mean, it was hard to see a tangible outcome of it. You mow a yard, though, you can see where you've been. You can see the grass cut, okay?
Yeah.
cook a meal and eat it, it's tangible. And that's hard to beat. I think people have an innate desire to do things that have some degree of impact, that do in fact influence yourself personally, those around you. And food is part of our lives. Whether you're a vegan or a keto person, doesn't matter. You're going to have to eat. Okay, it's ubiquitous, and that is an opportunity for you to, in my case, learn, experiment, and discuss. Just have a good time socially dealing with the cooking process itself and sharing your stories and your ideas with people. Everything we do is a story, as you probably know. You're a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. Stories are how people learn, how we communicate, how we remember things. And stories about food are many. And you probably heard many in your career and in this podcast anyway.
Well, I'm a chef, to be honest. I've been doing the podcast, I guess, we launched in January, but, I've been in the restaurant industry for 15 years. Yeah, food's a big part of my life. And I agree with that 100% of everything you just said. I'm happy you just said all of that, to be honest with you. That's a great attitude. And I think a lot more people are missing what food is and getting around food and joining around food. And you have the best conversations at a meal, right? You dig in, you dig deep. We're missing some of that. I don't have kids or anything or have that sort of, family time, if you will, to sit around, but I still enjoy those moments, right, with family and sitting around with friends or whatever. And I think, we need more of that, especially this day and age. And cooking, getting with people, telling stories. Your food tells a story. You can tell a story. There's just so much you can learn from a meal, cooking it, going through it. And yeah, I'm a big promoter of that on this podcast all the time. I'm always telling people to cook, get their kitchen reset up so they can cook more. The actual, actions they can take to actually start cooking more, because you can tell people to cook more all day long and the benefits of it, but if you don't show them actionable ways to make it happen, they're just not going to do it. So I do it all the time. Don't bring me
Right.
I'm the worst guy to bring in your kitchen, because I'll immediately say, move this here, bring this here.
It's okay. I understand exactly. Over my left shoulder here, you'll see my wine cellar, by the way. So
Yeah, love it. Love me some wine, for sure. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast for me there. I love wine, love drinking wine. I'm
not an expert, but I've learned as much as I can. I have great friends who are, and I just enjoy talking about wine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just about, you crack it open, you just start talking, and that's how you learn. Nobody's better than anybody else. I've literally worked with master psalms, second level psalms, third level psalms. I've worked in wineries. I've been through wineries in Spain. It's the real deal. Wine is, look, it's a grape. Okay. We squish it, you drink it. There's really not much to it. What you can really get out of it is like the meal, the conversation you'll have around drinking that wine and bring it. The wine.
That's right. It's a very social experience to have a glass of wine with somebody. That's one of my favorite things to do, is sit down at the end of the day with a glass of wine in my hand and with a friend with a glass of wine in their hand, and we'll just talk about the day.
Yeah.
And it's incredible how that all fits together in a very perfect way.
I 100% agree. That's a great way to end the podcast there, man. That's just a great way. Well, again, I really appreciate your candidness. You have such a great heart, and this was such a great conversation. And hopefully one day, maybe we will get to have a glass of wine when all this, clears up and everything, and have a meal. That was originally how we did this podcast, by the way, was we had a meal. We would literally eat and talk, and it was great. It was just awesome, but the pandemic hit, and I just put a stop to all that. So hopefully we'll get back to that one.
It was a dry spell there, and I've enjoyed getting back to my favorite restaurants again.
That's good.
I've got one just on the road from here that sells Jordan at half price on Tuesday nights. So I'm there on Tuesday nights quite often.
I'd be there too. That's a great wine. Absolutely. And look, get out there, support the local restaurants, support they need it. My people need it right now. We need all the support.
Amen to that, sir.
Yeah. So yeah.
I've felt so bad for those who've gone under. I have many friends in the restaurant industry who've gone under over the last several months. It's just a shame. We've lost a lot of diversity of food and of experiences by not those restaurants be able to sustain themselves through this mess. So I hope they can recover. I fear that many won't, though, unfortunately. we'll see.
Yeah, a lot of them have already closed, especially here in Austin. And yeah, absolutely. For the ones that are still going, get out there and support them because yeah, we don't need to lose more. When you lose a restaurant like that, there's culture. It's a staple. It's more than just the food and what it provided memories. It provided just so much. Restaurants and places like that just become a part of the city, and to see them go down is a shame. So for sure. So for what's still standing, get out there and support it. Love to hear that. But again, before we go, let us know, our listeners and everybody, let us know how they can connect with you online.
Not a problem. My email address, I have several emails, by the way. Probably the easiest one is one of my private emails. It's my name, Bowen.Loftin, Bowen. .Loftin at yahoo.com. That's probably a good address to use to get to me. Happy to have a conversation by email or text or whatever makes sense to somebody. But a starting point would be just sending me an email note. We can connect, and anybody who wants to follow through on any questions or comments they might have about my presence today on your show.
That's awesome. What about social media? What about your social media stuff?
I have several. Again, I have three Twitter accounts, actually. The one I use the most is at Aggie Prez, AGGIEPREZ. That's my Twitter handle, my most used account there. Facebook, I have a fan page, which I don't like to use much. My personal page is always filled at 5,000 friends, so it doesn't do much good there, but message me if you want to. Instagram is also at Aggie Prez on Instagram as well. Those are the primary things I use. LinkedIn probably isn't that common among your audience, but I have a LinkedIn account as well.
Awesome. That's great. Well, listen, again, thank you so much for your time. I'll let you get back to whatever you got to do.
I've got to cook dinner right now.
Boom. That's look at that. Get to work. Get to work. Where your wife's like, hey, listen, get off that podcast. I'm free. All right. She said,
I have time.
Take your time. Don't rush a meal. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. My best to you and your family, and to y'all safety during this time. And again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right.
Bye.
The Lone Star Plate podcast is produced by Texas Real Food. Go to texasrealfood.com and you can search your city for stores, butchers, restaurants, farmers markets, and more who are using fresh, artisanal, organic sources. It's a fun site that brings all natural options all together. I hope you enjoyed this episode. For more information, go to thelonestarplay.com. I'm your host, Patrick Scott Armstrong. Until next time.